Hey, good evening, Joe. Good to be with you again. And I'm just glad I didn't screw up too badly last time, so you're willing to have me on
You
for
you
more
you
reasons.
made the cut.
Two-time club. What is it on SNL? The Five Timers
There you
Club?
go. There you go.
Yeah,
A
we eat
couple,
like
couple more
jackets.
times, and we'll get you a robe like they do.
I would love that. Yeah.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Donut Bag, part of the Pulse Podcast Network and the PodHub Network. In this episode, I talked to Matt Gajtka about the latest goings on with the Penguins. As always, please follow or subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to this. Now we're available on iHeartRadio. Oh, I should say iHeartRadio. Ooh, I'm bad at singing. I won't sing anymore. Sorry. So please follow us on iHeartRadio. And get this, I'm close to our first sponsorship deal. I might actually make money from this. Anyway, the Donut Bag starts right now. All right, with me to talk about the Penguins and other things in hockey is Matt Gajtka. He is part of media relations for Robert Morris and the voice of the Riverhounds. Matt, how you doing?
Hey, good evening, Joe. Good to be with you again. And I'm just glad I didn't screw up too badly last time, so you're willing to have me on
You
for
you
more
you
reasons.
made the cut.
Two-time club. What is it on SNL? The Five Timers
There you
Club?
go. There you go.
Yeah,
A
we eat
couple,
like
couple more
jackets.
times, and we'll get you a robe like they do.
I would love that. Yeah. Let's work on
Uh,
that.
uh, Before we talk about the Penguins, let's talk about Tom Wilson. Ryan Reeves laid him out a couple times last night, and people are divided. Many people are saying, yes, this is great. Good, he deserves it. And other people are basically saying, how can you applaud somebody getting their brain scrambled? And then other people are saying, well, why doesn't the NHL do something about this? Where do you stand on everything that happened with him?
Well, last night it seemed like it was at the very least a borderline hit from Ryan Reeves, right? But it wasn't. Yeah, it had some malice, right? It had some intent. I guarantee you, Ryan knew what he was doing and who he was hitting in that situation. It felt like Ryan took the whole league's grievances upon his shoulders last night, or I guess Tuesday night, whenever we are running this show. But so that part of it, I understand why it's so satisfying for people, because if there is one universal enemy in hockey these days, outside of Washington, 30 fan bases agree that Tom Wilson is the universal enemy. And it's been a while since we had a player like this. And I think it's just a matter of Wilson going around the league and injuring basically one player on every team, it seems like, at this point. And there have been some high profile incidents, and the guy himself doesn't seem to get it. You read his interviews and you see what he has to say on TV, and his apologies come off as like non-apologies. He doesn't seem like he understands why the perception is the way it is, but he's deluding himself. It's really quite strange. So there is that sense. There's still that, as much as we may think that we are evolved as a sporting culture, there's still that desire for vigilante justice, right? Because I think even still, even after all the suspensions and this last one being 16 games, there's still a feeling that Wilson hasn't gotten what's coming to him. So maybe last night with Reeves hitting him and borderline, but I felt like it was pretty clean. If it's not late, I think it's a pretty clean hit. It's right there on that borderline in terms of how late a hit can be before it's interference. So I think it was pretty close to a perfect bit of retribution, with the unfortunate side effect that Wilson's helmet was already falling off, and so that's why he probably ends up with, something close to a concussion, if not one, legitimately. I guess we'll see about that. So, yeah, there was a catharsis, it felt like, on social media among the NHL followers out there on Tuesday, just because so many people want to see Wilson get what he's been dishing out.
Yeah, it's weird that everybody was applauding it except anybody related to being in Washington or a fan of the Capitals. Then they thought it was the worst thing ever, and they defend Wilson no matter what. is that just a matter? I mean, Penguins have had players like that, Ulf Samuelsson, Matt Cook. Is that just one of those things where, well, if he's on my team, it's okay?
Yeah, I think to a large degree it's tribalism in that way, and we see it in politics, we see it in sports. It's part of how we're wired as human beings in some way. Well, he's not an idiot, he's our idiot, that sort of mentality. And as you mentioned, the Penguins have had a couple of incidents, or a couple of players who have piled up the incidents, I should say. But I feel like even with Matt Cook, Penguins fans got to a certain point where they're like, we're out on this guy unless he changes his act. Right. And perhaps, I think, Joe, it's probably it's a discussion that has to be led from the team side of things, because you still see the Capitals and their head coach Todd Reirden defending Tom Wilson's actions just last week in that hit against the Devils, which was I felt like you could look at that a couple of different ways. That was almost an ink blot test as to how you already previously felt on Tom Wilson, how you felt on that one. But once the Penguins, getting back to the Matt Cook situation, once the team started to say, you saw Ray Shero and his teammates and Matt Cook himself, once they said this has to change, or we're cutting this guy loose, we're suspending him, we're putting him on the restricted list, whatever, then you saw the fans change their tune too. So I put a lot of the blame on the Capitals themselves, the leadership and the players, because as long as they're still defending it, then fans will feel justified in defending it. I don't think you can count on fans to think for themselves in this way, because emotion gets in the way, tribalism gets in the way. And just defending your own, that instinct it's tough to override. So it's got to come from the authorities, so to speak, in this case, which would be the people who run the Caps.
Yeah, or the NHL.
Well, even so, then you play the grievance card, right? If you're a fan base and you say, well, they're just picking on our guy because he quote unquote plays hard. So I don't think the league can change perception on that. It has to come from the team itself.
Well, they tried. I mean, they gave him a 20-game suspension at the start, which ended up getting it reduced anyway. But it looks like they tried to indicate, hey, we're tired of your constant crap, but they did nothing with. And like you said, this was borderline the Reeves hit on Wilson. But I don't. Does it seem like the league just wants the players to police themselves and they want to stay out of it, or do you think they'll be just sending more suspensions?
No, I don't think they want the players to police themselves. That's just a messy way to some difficult situations down the road. I think in the case of what Wilson against the Devils and then Reeves against Wilson just this week, they determined that the match penalty given out in the game to the offending player was sufficient enough punishment. So they're counting that as basically a one-game suspension, if you will. So I think if there were no penalties given on those two plays, then they would have perhaps given Reeves a one-gamer. But since there was actual discipline during the game, then they felt there was no need for supplemental discipline. And we can go either way on that. I'm okay with the decision on Reeves there, because I felt like it was pretty close to a clean hit. And I could see them giving a 2-minute penalty for interference on that, or maybe even a 5-minute, but a match penalty to kick Reeves out of the game, that felt like more than enough to me, just looking at that incident. And remember, Reeves, his last suspendable offense or suspended offense was, I think, in 2016. So we're past that statute of limitations, and he's no longer a repeat offender in the eyes of the Department of Player Safety. So we can also argue about that, whether 2 years makes a difference, or 3 years, or 4 or 5, or if there should be any kind of a time limit on it. But in the interest of being consistent, I think DOPS did the right thing on Reeves, at least.
Yeah, and just the maddening thing about Wilson is he doesn't have to be like that. He's talented, isn't he? Doesn't he? Was he on the first line with Ovechkin for the Capitals?
Yeah, he has hands. He's not a great player. I think there's almost a backlash to the backlash now, where people were saying, "Oh, he's a great player. He's a first liner." Well, yeah, he's a first liner, kind of in the way that Pascal Dupuis was a first liner with Sidney Crosby. It's not like if you had equal talents to Tom Wilson on your first line, you're probably going to lose 60 games in an NHL season. But yes, he's a good complementary player to star players, to elite players, and that's not easy to do necessarily. Don't get me wrong. but he's not like a top line guy to carry a line by himself. So he's good enough to not play like that. I agree, and there are a lot of guys like that who play with energy and who don't go over the line. So it's possible. We know it's possible. Maybe there are fewer than there used to be who play as rough and tumble as Tom Wilson likes to think he does in a clean way. But there are enough to let us know that even in the stricter rules and the stricter environment that the NHL is these days, it's still possible to play that way. So there's no this isn't any kind of a referendum on old-time hockey or whatever. It's just a referendum on Tom Wilson, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I wonder, not old-time hockey, but are we almost at the point where every team needs not a goon, but maybe a goon? I don't know. At least most of the rough and tumble players are like fourth liners. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's basically Reeves level. Like, is that someone to counteract someone like Wilson? Is that what's needed? Is at least one tough guy on every team?
I don't think so, because it's tough to sacrifice a roster spot. You see, even right now with the Penguins, last year, for whatever reason, Ryan Reeves did not fit very well in their system. Now he's playing much better in Vegas, and I give him credit. I give the Knights credit, because it seems like it's a really good fit out there. But you can't waste a roster spot. This isn't the days where you throw Jaromir Jagr out there for 25 minutes and pick your random guy. Dan Kessler or Todd Halushko is playing 2 minutes. It's just not that type of a league anymore. It's too strenuous. You can't play your top guys as much, or they're going to wear out. So if you are going to be like that, if you're going to be a very physical player who plays on the edge, then you also have to be able to play hockey. You also have to be able to skate, and you have to be able to compete and not cost your team when you're out there. So I think back to maybe even the Derek Engelland days in Pittsburgh. I thought they were probably overplaying him then. And I think he's rounded out his game more. To his credit, he has found a way to fit in the league, even though his foot speed isn't his top attribute. But you don't want a defenseman doing that either, because if you lose one of your three pairings and you got to mix it up, that's a bigger deal than losing a forward if, say, he goes in the box for 5 minutes or longer. The game has just evolved. So ideally, you do have a couple of players who can mix it up and can maybe get in the opponent's heads. But also, ideally, those types of players don't hurt you on the ice, whether because you're shorthanded or because they simply can't keep up with the pace.
Yeah. I mean, all he would need to do is just alter his game just a tiny little bit, just to deliver hard checks without trying to injure people. He would at least be very, very much feared in the league, and not people hating his guts as much.
Well, yeah, and you look at that play against the Devils, too, and I might give leeway if it's not a player like Wilson who tends to, quote, accidentally get himself into these situations over again. It just looks too egregious. It looks like he runs over the guy, even though you can slow it down and say, well, he tried to turn his hips at the last moment. Okay, all that being said, that's still wiping out a player, and I think the match penalty that game was warranted, given who the player is, in addition to the nature of the incident.
Yep. On to the Penguins. They won last night. They beat Colorado 6-3. Crazy game. They go up 3-0 in the first period. They give up 3, and then they score 3 in the third period on a Hornquist natural hat trick. And they're saying this might be a turning point in the season or something. Do you think that actually might be a turning point?
Well, it's definitely good to beat a team like Colorado, who is certainly one of the contenders in the Western Conference. I wouldn't call them an elite team. I think they're pretty top heavy. You look at last night, Tuesday night, and yeah, the top line scares you, but I'm not sure there's much beyond that really makes you want to alter your matchups as a coach, or that makes you worry about having the wrong players out there. So yes, the big three at the top there, Landeskog and McKinnon and Rantanen, who leads the NHL in points right now. Maybe people don't realize that, but he's on pace for about 135 this season. Scoring's up, but that's even more impressive. So to beat a team like that that's been tearing up the league and plays with a pretty fast pace, there's a lot of chatter out there still about the Penguins being slower and not able to keep up. I'm not sure I buy that necessarily. They're a little slower. I don't think they're a lot slower than they used to be. And so I think a lot of that's overblown. If they play the way they want to play, I think they can play as fast as anyone out there, or at least close to as fast as anyone out there. So to get a win against a good team, a quick team, I think is rather important to